Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are doing something a little different. We're stepping into a time machine, dialing it back to the 14th century, and dropping ourselves right into the middle of the Indian subcontinent. But I have to warn you, the history books usually gloss over this part. They talk about the ancient empires, then they sort of jump straight to the Mughals, and this massive chunk of time in the middle gets treated like a waiting room.
Which is a tragedy, honestly.
It is, isn't it?
Because this isn't a waiting room. This is the main event. It's where the entire political and cultural DNA of South India for the next few hundred years is forged.
Right. And from looking at the stack of research you've brought in, foreign traveler diaries, architectural blueprints, translations of old coins, this looks like one of the most volatile, creative, and, well, bloody periods in human history.
It absolutely is. We are looking at the Deccan Plateau in South India, starting roughly around the 1340s.
So set the scene for me. If I'm standing in the middle of India in 1340, what am I seeing?
You're seeing chaos. Absolute chaos. Just a few decades earlier, the Delhi Sultanate, which was the big power in the north, had pushed all the way south.
Right.
They sent generals like Malik Kafur down there, and they smashed the old order, the old kingdoms, the Yadavas, the Kakadiyas, the Hoysalas. They were dismantled.
Like a wrecking ball coming through the neighborhood.
Exactly. But here's the catch. The Sultanate couldn't hold it. It was too far from Delhi. You remember Muhammad bin Tughlaq?
The guy who tried to move the capital from Delhi to Daulatabad in the Deccan.
The very same. A brilliant idea on paper, a total disaster in practice. He drags the whole administration south, realizes it's a logistical nightmare, and then drags everyone back north to Delhi.
Leaving a massive vacuum behind him.
A power vacuum the size of a subcontinent. And nature, abhors a vacuum.
Yeah.
When the central authority in Delhi receded, the local governors and ambitious warlords didn't just go back to business as usual.
They smelled blood in the water.
They realized there was no one left to stop them. This is the moment of the Big Bang.
And out of this explosion, two giants emerge.
Two colossal empires that would split the peninsula between them. To the north of a certain river, you have the Bahmani kingdom. To the south, the Vijayanagara Empire.
And for the next 3 centuries, they are going to be locked in this deadly, intimate embrace, fighting, trading, and influencing each other.
It's a rivalry that will define an era.
So today's mission is to figure out how these two giants rose from the ashes, how they actually functioned, because some of the tech and admin stuff here is wild, and why they eventually fell.
And we have to start with the geography. You cannot understand this story without looking at the map. It's all about the rivers.
Okay, I'm picturing the Indian Peninsula. What are the landmarks I need to know?
Look for two rivers cutting right across the Deccan Plateau. You have the Krishna River, and flowing into it from the south is the Tungabhadra River.
Okay, so two big rivers merging.
And the land sandwiched between them, that's called the Raichur Doab. Doab literally means two waters.
And I'm guessing it's important.
This strip of land is incredibly fertile. It's rich in minerals, it's great for agriculture, some sources even mention diamond mines nearby. It sits right on the border between these two emerging powers.
So it's the price.
It is the bloodiest piece of real estate in medieval India. Most of the wars we are going to talk about today were fought over who got to control that fertile strip.
Okay, so we have the board set. Let's meet the players. Let's start in the north, above the Krishna River, the Bahmani kingdom. How does this kick off?
It starts with a rebellion. Simple as that. There was a commander named Zafar Khan. He was technically working for the Delhi Sultanate, but by 1345, the vibe had changed. The governors realized Tughlaq was weak and distracted.
He just decides, I'm not setting taxes anymore. I'm the boss now.
Pretty much. And he succeeds. In 1347, he declares independence and takes a new name, Bahman Shah.
That's a bold move. What kind of a guy was he?
It's incredibly bold. And he wasn't lacking in self-confidence. If you look at the coins minted during his reign, and we have photos of these in the notes, he didn't just call himself king.
Oh, what did he call himself?
He styled himself the Second Alexander.
Second Alexander, as in Alexander the Great.
The one and only. He was signaling that he wasn't just a local rebel. He had imperial ambitions. He wanted to conquer the world, or at least the Deccan.
So he sets up shop. Where is the capital?
First, he takes Devagiri, which was an old capital, but he quickly moves to Gulbarga in northern Karnataka. And this is where we see that he wasn't just a warlord. He was a systems guy.
What do you mean by systems guy?
Well, conquering land is one thing, governing it is another. He realized he couldn't micromanage an empire that stretched from the Arabian Sea to the Bay of Bengal. So he divided the kingdom into 4 regions called tarafs.
Tarafs, like provinces.
Exactly. And each taraf had a governor called a tarafdar. These guys were given a lot of autonomy. They collected revenue, they maintained their own armies, and they just sent a cut to the sultan.
That sounds efficient, but also kind of risky. If you give a guy an army and money, doesn't he eventually want to be king?
You have hit the nail on the head. That tension between the central sultanate and the powerful provincial governors is going to be the recurring theme of the Bahmani story. It works great at first, but it plants the seeds of its own destruction.
Okay, so Bahman Shah lays the foundation. But usually in these dynasties, there's a successor who really institutionalizes things, who is the builder of the Bahmani state.
That would be his son, Muhammad I. He rules from 1358 to 1375. If Bahman Shah was the conqueror, Muhammad I was the administrator. He's the one who establishes the Council of 8 Ministers.
8 ministers. Why is that significant?
Because it creates a specialized bureaucracy. It's a proper government. You have a minister for finance, a minister for foreign affairs, a minister for the judiciary. It's not just the king shouting orders, it's a cabinet.
So it professionalizes the state.
It does, and interestingly, centuries later, when the Maratha Empire rises under Shivaji, they use a very similar system called the Ashtapradhan, the Council of 8.
So the Bahmanis effectively wrote the playbook for Deccani administration.
They did. Muhammad I also gave the kingdom its visual identity. He built the Great Mosque at Gulbarga, and he was tough on crime. The sources say he ruthlessly suppressed highway robbery.
Which, if you're a merchant carrying spices or gold, is the #1 thing you care about.
Exactly. Safe roads mean a strong economy. But I want to fast forward a bit to a ruler who really breaks the mold. We need to talk about Firuz Shah Bahmani.
The Scholar King. I saw this in the notes, and I have to admit, I paused. You don't usually associate medieval sultans with hard science.
No, you don't, and that's what makes Firuz Shah so fascinating. He ruled in the early 1400s. He was a polymath, spoke multiple languages, studied theology, poetry, but his real passion was natural science.
And he set up something called a nature bureau. What even is that?
Yes, think about how modern that sounds. A nature bureau. He commissioned scholars and scribes to go out into the Deccan wilderness, which was dense and dangerous back then, to catalog plants, animals, birds, and geological features.
So it was like a botanical and zoological survey. In the 1400s,
It was an attempt to systematically understand the natural world of his kingdom. We aren't just talking about, oh, look at that pretty bird. They were recording behaviors, habitats, maybe even medicinal properties. It was an Indo-Persian scientific project that was arguably centuries ahead of its time.
that is wild. I mean, usually the history of this period is just Battle A, Battle B, Siege C. But here you have a guy who is essentially funding a National Geographic exhibition in 1400.
It shows the intellectual depth of the Bahmani court. It wasn't just a military camp. It was a center of high culture. They were inviting astronomers and poets from Persia and the Middle East to come and settle in Gulbarga and later Bidar, which became the new capital.
Speaking of coming from Persia, we have to talk about the man who is arguably the most tragic figure in this whole story, Muhammad Gawan.
Ah, Gawas, yes. If you want a character arc that fits a Shakespearean tragedy, this is it.
He wasn't a king, right? He was the prime minister.
Yes, the prime minister, the Sultanate. He served under a later king, Muhammad III, in the late 1400s. Gawan was Persian by birth. He came to India as a merchant, but he was so brilliant that he rose to the very top of the administration.
And he seems to be the guy who upgraded the Bahamani kingdom from regional power to superpower.
Absolutely. He was a military genius. He captured Goa from Vijayanagara, which was huge because it controlled the horse trade. And he is credited with introducing advanced gunpowder technology to the Bahmani army.
Wait, gunpowder. We're talking cannons and muskets.
We are talking about the mid to late 15th century here. Gunpowder was known, but Gawan systematized its use in sieges. At the Battle of Belgaum, he used mines and artillery in a way that the Vijayanagara forces hadn't seen before. It was a game changer.
So he wins wars, but he also tried to fix that tariff problem we talked about earlier.
Right. Remember how we said the 4 governors were getting too powerful? Gawan saw that danger. He said, these provinces are too big. So he subdivided them. Instead of 4 tarafs, he made 8.
Smaller provinces mean less powerful governors.
Yeah.
Simple math.
Exactly. He also centralized the military. He took direct control of certain lands to pay the royal army. He said, you governors can't control all the forts anymore. The king controls the strategic forts.
That sounds like smart policy. Why did it get him killed?
Because smart policy often makes powerful enemies. And here we have to touch on the internal politics of the Bahmani court. It was split into two deadly factions.
The Deccani versus the Pardesi.
Yes, the Deccanis were the Muslims who had been in India for generations, often intermarried with the local population. The Pardesis were the foreigners, immigrants like Gawan who had come from Persia, Turkey, or Arabia.
And the Deccanis hated that a foreigner like Gawain was holding all the power.
They resented it deeply. It was classic xenophobia mixed with professional jealousy. The Deccani nobles saw their own power being curtailed by Gawain's reforms, and they hated him for it.
So they decided to get rid of him.
They hatched a plot. They got Gawain's secretary, bribed him, and got a hold of Gawain's personal seal. They then wrote a treasonous letter, literally faked Gawain's handwriting, that made it look like Gawain was conspiring with the enemy, with the Vijayanagara king, to overthrow the Sultan.
They framed him for treason.
They took this forged letter to the Sultan, Muhammad III, who was drunk at the time, according to some accounts, and said, "Look, your favorite minister is betraying you."
And the Sultan believed it, just like that.
He didn't check the facts. He didn't give Gawain a chance to defend himself. He just ordered Gawain's execution immediately.
Wow.
Gawain was beheaded. And the tragedy is, the moment the Sultan sobered up and realized what he had done, that he had killed the architect of his empire's greatness, it broke him. The Sultan died a year later, supposedly from grief and guilt.
And without Gawain, the glue holding the empire together just melted.
It evaporated. The Deccani and Pardesi factions went to open war with each other. The governors in the provinces, those 8 new provinces, stopped listening to the capital. They realized the center was rotten.
And this leads us to what we call the fracture. The Bahmani kingdom doesn't just decline, it splinters.
It's like a slow-motion car crash that lasts for about 20 years. By the early 1500s, the Bahmani Empire has officially broken into 5 independent pieces. These are the Deccan Sultanates.
We have Bijapur, Ahmadnagar, Berar, Golconda, and Bidar.
Right. And we can't deep dive into all 5, but we have to look at 2 of them because their legacy is just massive. Let's start with Bijapur, the Adil Shahi dynasty.
These guys were the cultural heavyweights.
They really were. And the standout ruler is Ibrahim Adil Shah II. He rules in the late 1500s, early 1600s. And he is, wow, he's hard to categorize. His subjects called him Jagaguru.
World teacher. That's a Hindu title, isn't it?
It is. And he was a Muslim sultan, but he was deeply immersed in the local culture. He was a devotee of the Hindu goddess Saraswati. He wrote a book called Kitab-i-Nadas, which is this incredible treatise on music and aesthetics.
But the notes mention he understood the concept of rasa.
Yes, the emotional essence of art. He was trying to create a fusion culture, Dakni culture, that wasn't just Persian and wasn't just Hindu, but something new, a synthesis.
And Bijapur also gives us one of the biggest buildings on the planet, the Gol Gumbaz.
The mausoleum of Muhammad Adil Shah. You have to visualize this. It's a giant cube with a massive dome on top. At the time it was built, it was the largest dome in the Islamic world and one of the largest in existence, period.
Yeah, and it has some crazy acoustic properties too, right? The Whispering Gallery?
The Whispering Gallery. The dome is so perfectly constructed that if you stand on one side of the gallery and whisper against the wall, someone standing on the exact opposite side, over 120 feet away, can hear you clearly.
It's medieval surveillance tech again. I'm seeing a theme.
Or just architectural showing off. Speaking of acoustics, we have to talk about Golconda, the Kuchahi dynasty.
Golconda is famous for 2 things: diamonds and clapping.
Let's do the diamonds first. For a long time, the Golconda mines were the only source of diamonds in the world. The Hope Diamond, the Kohinoor, they all came from here. The Qutbi Shahi kings were unimaginably rich.
But the fort itself, tell me about the clap.
Okay, so the Golconda fort is built on a granite hill. At the very bottom, there's the main entrance, the Fateh Darwaza. If you stand at a specific point under the dome of that gate and clap your hands...
Just a single clap.
Sharp clap. The sound is reflected and amplified through a series of arches in the rock face itself, traveling all the way up to the Bala Hisar Pavilion at the very top of the hill.
How far is that? A kilometer?
It's about 1 kilometer away and significantly higher up vertically.
So I clap at the bottom, and the king hears it at the top. It's an alarm system.
Exactly. And again, this wasn't magic. It was physics. It was a warning system. If the gate guards saw an enemy army approaching, they could signal the citadel instantly without needing a runner.
That is just incredibly sophisticated. But despite the diamonds and the acoustic alarms, these sultanates didn't last forever.
No. They spent a century fighting each other and fighting Vijayanagara. But eventually, a bigger fish came along. The Mughals. Aurangzeb, the Mughal emperor, spent the last decades of his life obsessed with conquering the Deccan. He eventually swallowed all of them up by the late 1680s.
But before the Mughals wipe the board clean, there's another player we have to talk about, the counterweight. We've been looking north of the river. Now let's cross the Tungabhadra and look south.
To the Empire of Vijayanagara, the city of victory.
The origin story here feels almost cinematic. It starts with two brothers, Harihara and Bukka.
The Sangama brothers. Their backstory is a journey. They originally served the Kakatiya kingdom in Warangal. When Warangal fell to the Delhi Sultanate, they moved to another kingdom called Kampili. When Kampili fell, they were captured by the Sultan's army.
Taken as prisoners to Delhi.
Yes. And according to many accounts, they were forcibly converted to Islam and then sent back south as governors to quell rebellions on behalf of the Sultan.
Talk about a backfire.
A massive backfire. Once they got back to the south, they met a sage named Vidyaranya. He was a scholar, a saint, a towering intellectual figure. He basically told them, "What are you doing working for the invaders? Your duty is to protect the Dharma."
So they reconvert to Hinduism and declare independence.
Yes, in 1336. And they found a new capital on the banks of the Tungabhadra among these massive boulder-strewn hills. They called it Vijayanagara.
And they took a very interesting title, Hindu Suratrana. I want to unpack this because the language seems contradictory.
It does seem odd, doesn't it? Suratrana is a Sanskrit pronunciation of the word sultan.
So they were calling themselves Hindu Sultan.
Exactly. And this is a massive geopolitical flex. Think of it like a CEO adopting the title of a rival company's leader just to prove they play in the same league.
I see.
Sultan was the global word for ultimate power in the 14th century. By using it, Harihara and Bukka were saying to the Delhi Sultanate and the Bahmanis, "We are your equals. We speak the language of power, but we are claiming it for our side."
That is fascinating. It's not just rejecting the enemy, it's appropriating their status.
Precisely. And they combined this with ancient symbolism. They adopted the Varaha, the boar avatar of Vishnu, as their royal emblem. This connected them back to the old Chalukya and Gupta empires. They were building a bridge between the ancient Hindu past and the medieval Persianized present.
So the empire is born, it lasts for about 300 years, divided into 4 dynasties.
Right. You have the Sangama, who were the founders, the Saluva, who were short-lived usurpers, the Tuluva, which was the Golden Age, and the Aravavidu, which was the period of decline.
Let's stick with the early years. The Sangamas,
Yeah.
they didn't just sit in Hampi, they expanded.
Aggressively. They had to knock out the competition. They fought the Hoysalas to the south and eventually took out the Madurai Sultanate, which was a remnant of the Delhi invasion way down in Tamil Nadu.
And there's a specific document about the conquest of Madurai that I want to highlight. Madura Vijayam.
Yes, the victory over Madurai.
It's a poem, but who wrote it? That's the amazing part.
It was written by Ganga Devi, and here is the kicker. She was the wife of Kumar Kampana, the prince who led the army.
Can we stop for a second on that? Because this blows my mind. We usually get history from court historians who are paid to flatter the king. Here we have the prince's wife writing a war chronicle.
It's incredibly rare, and the text isn't just, "My husband is great." She describes the state of the country before the conquest. She talks about temples falling into ruin, the smell of roasted meat replacing the smell of incense, the chaotic state of the land. It's a very personal, emotional perspective on war.
It gives a voice to the era that we almost never hear.
A female voice at that. It's a treasure.
That is amazing. Now, aside from poetry and war, the Sangamas were also innovators. We talked about the acoustic fort in Golconda, but Vijayanagara had its own acoustic tech, the listening walls.
This is one of my favorite details. In the fortifications dating back to this period, archaeologists have found hollow chambers built into the massive stone wall.
What were they for? Not storage, I'm guessing.
Counter-espionage. If you're besieging a fort, one way to get in is to tunnel under the wall.
Right, undermine the foundation.
But tunneling makes noise. Pickaxes hitting rock. These hollow chambers in the walls acted as resonance boxes. They amplified low-frequency vibrations.
Like a primitive microphone.
Exactly. A guard standing in the chamber could hear the thud, thud, thud of miners digging way before they got close. It changes how we view their engineering. This isn't just piling rocks. This is acoustic science used for security.
It's brilliant. But let's fast forward to the main event, the peak of the empire, the Tuluva dynasty, and the man who defines the era, Krishnadevaraya.
Krishnadevaraya ruled 1509 to 1529. If you make a list of the top 5 greatest rulers in Indian history, he is on it. No question.
He had quite the reputation. The Andhra Foj.
A reference to the legendary philosopher king Hoja. Krishnadevara was the total package. He was physically imposing. He used to wake up before dawn and wrestle to stay fit. He was a brilliant general who led from the front. But he was also a sensitive poet and a patron of the arts.
Let's look at the military side first, because he inherited a messy situation, didn't he?
He did. The empire was being squeezed. The Bahmani successor states, Bijapur and the others were pressing from the north, and the Gajapatis of Orissa were attacking from the east.
So what did he do?
He went on the offensive. He launched a campaign against the Gajapatis and crushed them, forcing them to give him their princess in marriage. Then he turned his eyes to the Redshur Doab, that prize land we talked about.
And he took it.
In 1520, at the Battle of Redshur, it was a decisive victory against the Bijapur Sultanate. And a big reason for his success was his adaptability. He saw that the traditional way of fighting elephants and swords wasn't enough. He needed what the enemy had.
Guns and horses.
Precisely. And this is where the Portuguese come in. The Portuguese had just arrived in India. Vasco da Gama landed in 1498. By Krishnadevaraya's time, they controlled Goa.
So Krishnadevara makes a deal.
A strategic alliance. He didn't like the Portuguese particularly. He knew they were troublesome, but he needed their Arabian horses and their muskets. They were the key to military superiority.
Why were imported horses so important? Couldn't they just breed horses in India?
That's a great question. The answer is soil and climate. The Deccan Plateau is great for cotton, but it's terrible for horse breeding. The pasture land doesn't produce the right kind of grass. Indian horses tended to be smaller and weaker than the massive war horses from Arabia and Persia.
So if you wanted a heavy cavalry that could smash through enemy
You
lines.
had to import them. It was a non-negotiable.
So the empire's security literally depended on this trade route.
It was an existential need. That's why he was friendly with the Portuguese. He even allowed them to build a fort at Patkal to ensure that supply of horses never stopped.
Okay, so he's a warrior. But you said he was a poet too.
A serious one. He wrote a Mukta, which is considered a masterpiece of Telugu literature. It's a poem about the wedding of the god Vishnu to the saint Andal. But tucked inside this religious story are detailed instructions on statecraft.
Like what?
How to manage your spies, how to treat your ministers, how to develop irrigation. It's like Machiavelli's The Prince, but written in beautiful verse by a guy who is actually running an empire.
And he surrounded himself with talent. The Ashtadhyajas.
The 8 elephants of literature. His court was a magnet for the best minds. The most famous one is Tenali Ramakrishna.
Tenali Rama. I think every kid in India knows the stories of Tenali Rama. He's the jester, the trickster with a quick wit.
Right, he's like the Birbal to Krishnadevaraya's Akbar. The folklore paints him as a funny guy who outsmarts people, but historically he was a brilliant scholar and poet. The fact that these stories survive tells you how vibrant the court life was.
So we have a strong king, a vibrant culture, but how did the machinery of the empire work? How do you run a state this big without telephones or internet?
Right. You outsource. The Vijayanagara administration was built on the Nayaka system.
Break that down for me. What is that?
It's often called the Emir Nayaka system. The king doesn't pay his generals a salary in cash. Instead, he gives them a territory, a province, a district, sometimes just a cluster of villages. This territory is their amaram.
So the general becomes the governor of that land.
Effectively, he's the Nayak. He collects the taxes from the farmers. He keeps a chunk of that money to feed himself and, crucially, to maintain a specific number of horses, elephants, and soldiers.
So it's a gig economy for the military. You provide the troops when the king calls.
Exactly. And once a year, during the Mahanavami festival, the Nayaks would come to the capital, bring massive tribute, and show off their armies to the king. It was a way of renewing their contract and showing loyalty.
But isn't there a danger here? If a Nayak gets too rich and has a huge army?
Why does he need the king? That is the fatal flaw. Under a strong ruler like Krishnadevara, the Nayaks stayed in line because they were afraid of him. But the moment the center got weak, the Nayaks, especially the ones far away in the south, like Madurai and Tanjavur, started acting like independent kings.
So the system allowed the empire to expand fast, but it also made it fragment easily.
Precisely.
And what about the average person? The farmer? How was their life structured?
For them, life was governed by the Iyengar system.
What's that?
Every village was a self-contained unit run by 12 officials called Iyengars. The headman, the accountant, the watchman, the blacksmith, the carpenter, and so on.
Like a village board.
A hereditary, all-powerful board. They were paid with tax-free land, and they controlled everything. You couldn't sell your land without the accountant's permission. You couldn't settle a dispute without the headman. It provided immense stability. Governments rose and fell, but the village system kept chugging along.
But it also meant social mobility was very low.
Extremely low. You were born into your role.
And the travelers who visited, they talk about the wealth, right?
They were dazzled. Domingo Paes, a Portuguese horse trader, writes about the markets of Hampi. He says you could find everything there. Diamonds, rubies, silks from China, velvet from Mecca. He describes the king's palace as being plated in gold.
But they also noticed the poverty.
Yes. It was a society of extreme inequality. The nobles were dripping in jewels, and the common people were often living in simple huts, working the land to pay those heavy taxes. A huge wealth gap.
There's one detail about the society that I found really surprising, the role of women in the palace.
This comes from the chronicle of Fernão Nunes. He was another Portuguese traveler. He mentions that inside the royal palace there were thousands of women, and they weren't just wives or concubines.
What were they doing?
Everything. He lists women who were astrologers, women who kept the accounts, women who were judges, and, my personal favorite, women who were wrestlers.
Wrestlers, female wrestlers.
Yes, female guards and wrestlers. It suggests that within the royal enclosure, gender roles were much more fluid than we assume. The king trusted women with his security and his money.
I love that image. Now, we need to talk about the city itself, Hampi. Today, it's a UNESCO World Heritage Site, famous for its ruins.
Yeah.
But in 1520, what was it like?
It was one of the largest cities in the world, probably second only to Beijing. Estimates suggest 500,000 people lived there. It was a metropolis.
And it was designed to be siege-proof.
This is brilliant urban planning. Abdur-Razak, the Persian ambassador, visited in the 1440s. He wrote that the city had 7 concentric lines of fortification. But here's the genius part. The walls didn't just enclose the houses.
What else did they enclose?
The agricultural fields, the gardens, and the forests.
So if an enemy army surrounds you and cuts off the food supply?
You don't care. You're growing rice and vegetables inside the walls. You can hold out for years. It turned the city into a self-sustaining fortress.
And the construction technique was unique too. No mortar.
No cement. If you go to Hampi today, look at the walls. They are made of massive granite blocks, wedge-shaped. They are cut so perfectly that they lock together like a 3D puzzle. Gravity holds them in place.
So you can't just knock them down with a battering ram?
Not easily, no.
Let's walk through the city. You had 2 main areas, the Royal Center and the Sacred Center.
The Royal Center is where the palaces and admin buildings were. The centerpiece is the Mahanavami Dibba.
That's that giant stone platform that's still there.
It's huge, covered in carvings of hunting scenes and dancers. This was the stage. During the Dussehra festival, the king would sit on top of this platform. He would watch the parades of elephants, the wrestling matches, the firework displays. It was theater. It was about showing the people and the Nayaks, I am the source of all power.
And then down by the river, you have the Sacred Center, the temples.
The Virupaksha Temple, which is still active today, dedicated to Shiva, and the Vithala Temple, which is the architectural peak.
That's the one with the stone chariot.
Yes, the iconic stone chariot. But inside the temple hall, there are the musical pillars.
We talked about acoustic walls, now acoustic pillars.
These are 56 slender stone columns carved out of single blocks of granite. When you tap them with your finger or a sandalwood stick, they emit musical notes. The Saragama notes.
How is that even possible with stone?
They adjusted the width and the density of the columns to tune them to specific frequencies. It's mind-boggling precision. Some people think they were used to accompany dance performances. The building itself was an instrument.
So you look at this empire in the 1550s. It's wealthy, it's advanced, it's fortified, it has a massive army. It looks invincible.
It did look invincible, and that was the problem. Invincibility breeds arrogance.
The fall of Vijayanagara is one of the most sudden collapses in history. It all unravels in one afternoon.
It does. And the man at the center of the storm is Rama Raya.
Who was he? Was he the king?
Technically, no. He was the regent. He was the son-in-law of Krishnadevaraya, and he was running the show for the puppet king, Sadasivaraya. But Ramaraya was the de facto ruler. And he was a brilliant strategist, but he played a dangerous game.
What was his strategy?
He looked at the 5 Deccan Sultanates to the north, Bijapur, Golconda, Ahmadnagar, and the others, and he saw them fighting each other. He thought, great, I'll keep them fighting.
Divide and rule.
The classic playbook. So he would ally with Bijapur to attack Ahmednagar. Then a year later, he'd switch sides and help Ahmednagar attack Bijapur.
Keeping them off balance.
Exactly. He treated them like pawns, and for a while it worked. Vijayanagar became the arbiter of the Deccan, but Ramaraya got cocky. His soldiers started disrespecting the sultans, raiding their lands, burning mosques.
And eventually the sultanates realized who the real enemy was.
They realized they were being played, so they did the impossible. They set aside their generations of hatred and formed a grand alliance. Bijapur, Ahmadnagar, Golconda, and Bidar united. They married their families together to seal the deal.
And they marched south.
January 1565. The combined armies of the sultanates met the massive army of Vijayanagara near the villages of Rakshasi and Tanadi. The Battle of Talikota.
The numbers must have been staggering.
Hundreds of thousands of soldiers, elephants, cannons, cavalry. Ramaraya was in his 80s, by the way.
In his 80s, and leading an army.
And he insisted on leading the battle from a litter, a carried chair. He was confident. He thought, I've beaten these guys individually a dozen times. I can beat them together.
So what went wrong?
Two things. First, the Sultanate artillery was better cannons, faster firing. Second, betrayal. At a critical moment, two Muslim generals in the Vijayanagara army, who had thousands of soldiers under them, switched sides.
No.
They turned their weapons on the Vijayanagara center.
That broke the line.
Chaos ensued. Ramaraya fell from his litter. He was captured by the Sultan of Ahmadnagar, and right there on the battlefield, he was beheaded. His head was raised on a long spear so the Vijayanagara troops could see it.
And when an army sees their leader's head on a spear,
they rout. The panic was total. The Vijayanagara army dissolved.
But the battle was just the beginning of the horror. What happened next?
The road to Hampi was open. The Sultanate armies marched to the capital. They stayed there for 5 months.
5 months? What were they doing?
Systematically dismantling the city. They weren't just looting, they were erasing. They set fire to the wooden pavilions. They smashed the stone idols. They destroyed the aqueducts that brought water. They were trying to wipe it off the map.
It sounds personal.
It was. It was vengeance for decades of Ramaraya's arrogance. The city, which had 500,000 people, was abandoned. The survivors fled south. The city of Victory became a ghost town of ruins.
The empire technically survived, right, for a while.
It limped on. The capital moved to Penukonda, then Chandragiri, but the magic was gone. The Nayaks, those powerful governors in Madurai and Mysore, saw the weakness and declared independence. The great centralized empire fractured into petty kingdoms.
So, as we wrap this up, what is the takeaway? We have these two empires, Bahamani and Vijayanagara, locking horns for 300 years. What did they leave behind?
I think we have to look beyond the wars. Yes, they fought. But they also created a shield. By holding the line in the Deccan, they prevented the North Indian powers, first the Delhi Sultanate, then the Mughals, from swallowing the South for centuries. This allowed a unique South Indian culture to flourish.
And it wasn't just Hindu versus Muslim, was it? The story is more complex.
Not at all. That's the modern projection. Back then, it was fluid. You had the Hindu sultans in Vijayanagara wearing Persian-style tunics. You had the Muslim Jagadguru in Bijapur singing about Saraswati. You had soldiers and artists moving back and forth across the river constantly. It was a period of incredible synthesis.
And if Talikota hadn't happened?
That's the big what if. We talked about the Nature Bureau, the acoustic engineering, the trade networks. This was a society on the verge of something. Maybe a scientific revolution, maybe an industrial leap. Who knows?
But the fire at Hampi put an end to that specific trajectory.
It did. It reminds us how fragile civilization can be. You can have the strongest walls, the most gold, and the smartest acoustic tech, but one bad political calculation, one battle, and it can all turn to dust.
A sobering thought to end on. From the Nature Bureau to the listening walls, the Deccan in the 14th century was a lot more than just a battlefield.
It was a laboratory of civilization.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
My pleasure.
And to our listeners, next time you see a ruin, remember, it wasn't always a pile of rocks. It was a home, a fortress, and maybe even a musical instrument. See you next time.